Hey guys, this is the first of two new episodes coming today. In this one, I'll be looking at all the burning issues facing the Golden State Warriors right now after their NBA Cup elimination against the Houston Rockets on Wednesday night. It'll be published around about 4 p.m. Pacific time. At 7 p.m. Pacific time, I'll have another episode looking at all the recent trade speculation surrounding the Warriors. Jimmy Butler, LeBron James, the Brooklyn Nets guys, and all the players that have been linked to the Warriors as trade activity really starts to heat up. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you're all having a good week. Been a few days since the last episode. I've actually been in Melbourne for a little bit of a holiday over the last 3 or 4 days. Just arrived back an hour ago, so I thought jump straight back into this and get on to all the stuff that's been happening around the Warriors on and off the court over the past few days because there's been so much going on. Haven't spoken on this podcast since the Warriors were eliminated from the NBA Cup in the quarterfinal against the Houston Rockets at Toyota Center on Wednesday night, a 91-90 defeat there. Really, really disappointing. Again, another late game meltdown. Warriors didn't score at all in the final 3 minutes. It's become a very bad habit that Golden State have got into over the last really 9 games here. They're now 2-7 in their last 9 games. They've had, I think, 5 of those 7 losses. They've had leads in the fourth quarters, and it's generally the offense that really struggles down the stretch, and that was again the case against the Rockets. The officiating clearly was not helpful, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but from my point of view, I certainly concur with most fans out there, with Steve Kerr, who was obviously very angry and upset after the game, that foul call on from Jonathan Kuminga on Jalen Green. I don't know, this is what I kind of love and hate about, well, I mainly hate about sport really, is that you can have a situation like that where technically, like the NBA came out in the last 2-minute report and said that was the right decision, that Bill Kennedy made the right call by calling that a foul. And yet 99.9% of fans, like everyone that's not a Houston Rocket fan, would look at that and say that's not a good call. Like that's a terrible call. And that's the thing about sport. And it happens in Australian rules football all the time as well, where I feel like oftentimes the rules can be not black and white enough and can be up to the officials' determination, that when you look back at it and when the referees or the association, whatever, are trying to analyze the decision and try and explain the decision, the rule book, you can make the argument that was the right call. But again, having a feel for the game, realizing that, hey, do we really want to decide the game in the final seconds on a foul, 80 feet from the basket? Again, sometimes it's tough for me because I'm always of the belief that, well, not always, but generally of the belief that, hey, if it's a foul call, it's a foul call, right? And it shouldn't matter what time of the game it is, what the score is, that if it's a foul, it's a foul. And again, Bill Kennedy clearly thought that Jonathan Kuminga reached over and had his arm over Jalen Green's shoulder and that it was a foul. And again, you can point to the rule book and probably say, yeah, he's right. But then again, having a feel for the game, not wanting that game that was a fantastic game to be decided by that call, I don't know. It's really interesting because, again, generally I'm of the belief that a foul call, that the game should be officiated the same regardless of the score or what time of the game it is. But it always happens I think, generally it should happen in the NBA a fair bit down the stretch, especially, come playoff time and stuff like that. It happens in Australian rules football all the time where generally the last quarter, the last 2 to 5 minutes of a close game, umpire, we call it swallow the whistles, right? Where the umpires often put the whistles away and let players determine the game as much as they can. And on that occasion, Bill Kennedy decided to go the other way and said, no, I don't really want the players to dictate the result of this. I'm just going to but I'm just going to call this foul in a time where I probably shouldn't. And so, I don't know, there were so many different things that played a part in that final result. Obviously, Gary Payton II probably should have held on to the ball when he was on the floor there. That was a really bad decision by him to pass it up. In saying that, they were clearly trying to get a timeout call. It's another thing that frustrates me significantly is the fact that I swear a lot coaches are on the sidelines, like right in the ears of referees in situations like that. And the officials are so determined on focusing on the game and what's going on where the ball is, that they just blatantly ignore the coach right in their ear yelling, timeout, timeout. I swear it happens all the time. And yet again, in that situation, like Steve's next to the ref with GP2 on the floor with the ball yelling timeout, and yet they don't hear him or like that. I swear that just happens all the time. It's just part of the game. But it's nonetheless disappointing. And then obviously the Steph one early in the fourth quarter where the ref thought that Aaron Holiday could block Steph's jump shot. I just don't think that's really ever going to happen to the point where he misses that badly. So for them to not see that blatant, or for that to be a blatant non-call that should have been a shooting foul, Steph going to the free throw line, the officiating in that game was really poor. And clearly there's a lot of talk at the moment about the NBA ratings and a lot of people being very critical of the officiating. And I just think it's like, we're never going to get these things perfect. Like, I would hate to be a referee or an umpire of any sport because it's a very thankless job. Obviously, there wouldn't be a game without them, so we have to appreciate them to a degree. But it's one area, like, I think throughout even the last 10, 15 years, generally sport gets better. Like, players, athletes, as it becomes more professional, it gets better. Like, the same should be applying to officiating, and I think it's getting worse, if anything. Like, and I don't understand how that can happen, where we should be getting more and more professional as a sport. The referees should be getting more and more professional, spending more and more time in their job, focusing on what they need to do, and yet it seems to be getting worse. And so obviously we've got challenges now and stuff to try and halt those mistakes that are made, but it's clearly not doing enough, and it's just disappointing at the end of the day. And I still think, like, you win some, you lose some, and over the course of a season, everything kind of evens itself out. But you look back at a game like that and you think, yes, you should have won the game on multiple fronts. You should have won the game if the refereeing was a little bit better. And to be fair, the Warriors just should have played better. And that's what I always think is, you're going to have situations where refs make mistakes, and it should be up to you as a team to try and put yourself in a situation where you're not hugely impacted by those mistakes, and that you are good enough to allow some leeway where the refs can make a mistake and it's not actually going to be a game-defining, game-changing decision. And so that's ultimately the most disappointing thing for the Warriors is their offense again down the stretch. As I said before, going scoreless in the last 3 minutes. That's what cost them the game in the end. Like, I look back at the officiating and think, yeah, that's really disappointing, but the Warriors shouldn't be allowing that to come into play as much as what it did and what it has through some of the recent losses over this last 9-game stretch where they're 2-7. So they've just got to be better. They've just got to be better. That's simple. You can point to the officiating as much as you want. Just be better. Just be better and not have that be a game-defining factor. Make sure you've got a significant lead where refs can make mistakes, and you know what? It's not going to necessarily cost us the game. So, yeah, the late-game offense is a real issue, and the Warriors over this last 9-game stretch are now 28th in offensive rating, which is really poor. They're 29th in offensive rating in fourth quarters, which is only ahead of the lowly Washington Wizards. Really can't get much worse than that. So they've got to address some things here. A few of the kind of burning issues beyond just obviously the offense itself, particularly in fourth quarters. The starting lineup uncertainty right now, and not just like starting lineup, but just lineup uncertainty in general. This has been a huge thing for me going back a couple of years now, really. I don't think you can be a good NBA team, a championship contending team, if you don't know what your best lineup is or what your starting lineup is. And this is the issue for the Warriors going back to the start of last season, where I think they might have used like 27 different starting lineups last season. They just don't know what their best starting five or even really best closing lineup is. Now, maybe closing lineup, you could make a little bit of an argument that it's like Steph, Draymond, obviously, Wiggins, obviously, like that's the top three, then probably Kuminga, and then whoever else you want to be as your fifth. But the starters, so the last 2 games here, we've had Steph, Buddy, GP2, Kuminga, and Draymond. So clearly Wiggins will come back at some point. hopefully next game up against the Mavericks on Sunday. Hopefully he's back. You'd expect him to take the Peyton position. But then does Hield continue to start? He's been better the last 2 games, obviously. Does Draymond continue to start at center? Clearly, I've talked relentlessly about that probably being unsustainable. We know before that Steve said he was going to continue to go to Draymond off the bench, but now he's back starting at center. So, there's just all these different things, which I think makes obviously trying to orchestrate something on the trade market all the more important, and I'll get into that in the next episode. But yeah, I think the Warriors need to work out what they're doing here, because the constant uncertainty, it just makes life so difficult for everyone, basically. And if you look at the Warriors lineups this season, they've used one lineup for more than 35 minutes this season. One lineup for more than 35 minutes. That's absurd. That one lineup was the Steph, Lindy Waters, Wiggins, Draymond, TJD lineup that they used for 71 minutes, obviously mostly across that 6-game stretch where Waters started after the Melton injury. So that's to have one lineup over 35 minutes. And for that lineup to include Lindy Waters, imagine saying at the start of the season that the Warriors' most used lineup after 24 games would feature Lindy Waters III. You would have thought that, oh my God, this guy's really come out and been a complete revelation for the Warriors. Well, he was in that one game against the Pelicans in like the 4th game of the season. Since then, he's shot like 30% from 3-point range. Like, I don't know. It's just you look at the good teams in the league and some of these minutes here. So again, factor in the Warriors have used one lineup for over 35 minutes this season. The Cavs, top of the Eastern Conference, their kind of starting lineup or best lineups, or most used lineup, I should say, has seen 139 minutes together. The Magic, despite injuries to Banchero and now Franz, 152 minutes. Boston, 184 minutes, and that's the one that includes Horford, not Porzingis. OKC had their injury to Chet, and obviously Hartenstein didn't start the season, so they're not really part of this. Houston, second in the West, 338 minutes with their starting lineup, obviously with Van Vliet, Green, Brooks, Jabari Smith, and Brent Şengün. So the good teams always have the most continuity, I think. And I don't think it's a case where you can blame injuries in this situation where you could say, oh, well, you look at a team like the Pelicans, they've used so many different lineups because they've had a bunch of injuries. The Warriors have been reasonably fit and healthy. Obviously, the really devastating, disappointing loss of Melton is one thing. But, Steph's missed a couple. Draymond missed 1 or 2 or whatever. Wiggins has now missed a couple. There's been some frustrating little absences here and there, but generally, they've actually been pretty fortunate health-wise, and yet they cannot. We're over a quarter of the way through the season. This is always going to be my issue in the off-season, is I didn't want to get in a situation where we're constantly changing what's going on in terms of the starting lineup and closing lineups and just lineups in general. Just we need to find something. Steve needs to find something that works and that he can stick to. And I still don't know what it is. And that's why a trade you'd think would have to be coming here reasonably shortly, is because I'm still not sure what the answer is. I think the best answer is probably having those 4 guys, Steph, Wiggs, Draymond, and Kuminga together, and then a 5th guy. But who is that 5th guy? Is it Buddy Hield? Is it Podziemski? Is it Moses Moody? Is it Gary Payton? Is it Lindy Waters? Like, you just don't know who it is. And then, again, you come down to the Draymond situation and think, well, we don't really want to have him at starting center for the remainder of the season. So, I don't know, that's why there's so many holes for the Warriors right now. It's like the 2-guard position is a massive, massive issue right now. The 5 spot, again, Draymond, not overly sustainable for him to start there for the remainder of the season. So what are you doing there? Is Draymond going to come off the bench? The backup point guard right now with kind of Pods, clearly Steve doesn't have entire faith in Pods now, given we saw Pat Spencer minutes in the second quarter on Wednesday where the Warriors had like 26 points in the first 20 minutes of that game. Again, that's why you look at the close game, you look at the officiating, you look at the late game offense. The Warriors probably say they lost the game in that second quarter, where they just could not get anything going offensively till like really late in the second quarter. But to have 26 points in the first 20 minutes, essentially, you're really putting yourself behind the 8 ball and putting yourself in a tough spot to come back and actually win that game, which they should have in the end. But still, they'll look back at that and think, what were we doing? And Steve was trying to get some level of offense out there, and even threw Pat Spencer out. And when I saw that and thought, okay, Pat Spencer's getting minutes, like genuine rotation minutes in an NBA Cup quarterfinal, got to do something about that backup point guard spot. So there's so many errors, so many areas and holes to fix for the Warriors that you don't really know where to start, and therefore, like, who do you actually go and get on the trade market? Again, I'll get into that on the next episode. But yeah, the offense right now, again, 28th in offense over the last 9 games, 29th in fourth quarters. I don't know, where do you put the blame, I suppose, for this? And I mean, we can look and say that Steph needs a lot more support. I think sometimes Steph gets an easy run when he has some stretches where he doesn't perform well, and therefore the offense doesn't perform well because, you know, Steph is the engine of the offense. Like, clearly those two things correlate. The Warriors aren't going to have a great offense if Steph Curry is not playing great himself. That's just what it is. I think sometimes, like, he goes through these bad stretches. Again, the Warriors go through a bad stretch as a result, and we just look at it and think, well, Steph needs more help. Like, he needs another star. He needs another guy that, you know, another all-star level guy, another guy that can average 20 to 25 points a game. I think he gets off a little bit lightly sometimes, and I think it must be said that over this 9-game stretch, Steph's been really bad. Like, Steph's been really bad since basically that Mavs game. And what I mean really bad, I mean by his standards. Like, not, he's clearly still a good NBA player, but by his lofty standards, hasn't been great. So since that Mavs game where he was really fired up, obviously, to play against Clay, had 37 points, had the last 12 points for the Warriors, absolutely killed it at the end and won the game for us. Since then, he's had one game shooting over 50% from the floor. Like, that's not great. And then in the last 9 games, he's 23 points a game, which is actually higher than his season average. He's 22.8 points for the season, which is clearly a significant low across the last 10, 12 years here. And then the last 9 games, he's 23 on less than 40% shooting from the floor. So at some point, we have to stop pointing the finger at others and actually say, you know what? If Steph actually played a little bit better in some of these games and actually had a couple more games where he shot over 50% from the floor, we'd probably win half these games. And instead of being 2-7 in the last 9, we're 4-5, or we're 5-4, and we're still actually in a good spot, top 4 in the Western Conference. So I did want to mention Steph a little bit and say, hey, yeah, we've got all this trade market talk, all this speculation about, you know, trying to get a second star and stuff like that. How about our number one franchise guy actually perform to the level that we expect? And maybe we should lower our expectations a little bit. He's 36 years old, but I still think Steph is Steph, and that he's going to be, you know, he's still going to remain one of the top 10 players in the league, but he hasn't performed like that in the last 9 games. And therefore, there's no coincidence that the Warriors have gone on this, you know, not losing streak because they've closed it. Well, they, you know, won a couple of games lately, but they had that 5-game losing streak, and now they're 2-7 in their last 9. So at some point, you got to look at Steph and say, hey, let's see him perform a little bit better. And taking that shot, obviously, against the Rockets, that final shot, the step back 3 with still 8-9 seconds on the shot clock. You could argue that, that was the best look he was going to get. It doesn't really matter to me. Like, he should have burnt a little bit more clock in that situation. And then with the scramble and stuff like that, the time might have actually elapsed and you just win the game. Rather than him leaving 8-9 seconds, and there's a 4 to 5 second scramble, and then obviously that foul call on Kuminga. So, yeah, he's been disappointing. And I think we so often look at the young guys, some of the role players, the Warriors' lack of a second star, and just think that Steph needs more help. Well, at some point, Steph's also got to lift his game himself. The other one I wanted to quickly mention in terms of the offense and stuff like that is clearly Kuminga, who is one of the most fascinating players in the league right now, because clearly Steve and the Warriors have just decided we're going to let this guy run loose and just see what we have and make a decision from there. Like, this is a 6-week trial period to basically see, is Jonathan Kuminga the guy, or is he not the guy? Is he going to be a part of our future moving forward? Do we want to pay him $150 million as a restricted free agent, or don't we? And if they don't, then he's probably going to be off the team by the February 6th trade deadline. I spoke about last episode or whatever, you know, going back to when they decided that he's going to be the starting power forward moving forward. I think it's the right decision. I stick by that. I still think it's the right decision. Clearly, a lot of trade speculation revolving him at the moment. Look, I think the jury's still out. I still don't think we really, it's only been a couple of games here. You need a 10 to 15 game sample size to figure out whether this is going to work or not. I don't think Wednesday's loss to the Rockets was down to Jonathan Kuminga. I saw a lot of people really critical of him after the game. He scored 20 points, but it took him 20 shots, 8 of 20 from the floor. Well, again, Steph had 19 on 17 shots. It's not as if anyone else was any better. And so for him, he's in a really fascinating spot where his volume has just gone soaring up. So if you look at his minutes, so in his first 15 games, he had 2 games in excess of 28 minutes, right? In this last 7 games, he's had 6 games in excess of 28 minutes, including over 36 minutes in the last 2, obviously, where Wiggins has been out, so that plays a factor. In terms of shot attempts, in the first 15 games, he had 1 game of 15 or more shot attempts. And then again, in the last 6 times, he's had at least 15 shot attempts. So it was really funny watching the other day. He was almost the Warriors' number 1 option on offense over Steph in that game against the Rockets. And yes, it wasn't efficient, but he is capable of getting 20 to 25 points. And on this roster, the Warriors severely lack that. And there's a lot of players you could say, there's a lot of players in the league you could say, oh, well, if you just give them the opportunity, if you actually give them the license to take 15, 20 shots, there's a lot of guys in the NBA that could score 20, 25 points. And while that's true, there's actually not really anyone on the Warriors that could do that. It's basically Steph, Wiggins, and Kuminga that you give the volume to, they can actually score points. If you went out and, Pods, for example, if you went out and said to Pods, okay, you just try and take 15 shots in this game, do you reckon Pods is actually going to get to 20 points? I don't think so. I don't even know how he'd get 15 shot attempts up because he's just not that kind of, and that's just singling out Brandon Podziemski. I could say the same about Moody. There's just a heap of guys who are not, the Warriors don't have any go-to scorers. And so when Kuminga takes 20 shots and people are critical of his inefficiency, it's where else are those shots going? When Wiggins is not there and it's only him and Steph, who else do you want taking the shots? And so even if he goes 8 of 20, I think that's still better than what else you have. And again, maybe that comes down to you've got to make a move for someone else here. But I actually I think I'm pretty optimistic this guy's just going to average 20 plus points for the rest of the season. Now, it might be 20 plus points with the Warriors and another team coming here shortly that he plays with over the last few months of the season. But even if he if he sticks with the Warriors, I'm pretty confident he might just average 20 points for the rest of the season. He's a very talented scorer. Now, some of the stuff the off the dribble threes, the step back threes, I don't know. I just don't really like that. Unless you've hit a couple of standstill catch and shoot threes, maybe if you've really got it rolling and you're feeling it, then fine. But when that's a general part of your offense, no, thank you. But it's really fascinating to watch. The other night against the Rockets, they are really few times there where they're just trying to get him going downhill against Şengün. Whoever Şengün's guarding, we're putting the ball in JK's hands, and again, whoever Şengün's guarding, we're just putting them in a pick and roll, trying to get a switch, or at least just trying to get JK going downhill against Şengün. That was really fascinating to watch the Warriors relentlessly using Jonathan Kuminga against an opposing player and trying to go to him as much as possible in those scenarios. So it's fun to watch to a degree, but then it's also not fun if the Warriors are losing games. I do like the fact they're trying it out. I do but at what point does as I said before, it really comes down to, sorry, when I say as I said before, I mean as I've said before in previous episodes, it really comes down to whether or not the Warriors are winning games or not. And if they're losing games and Jonathan Kuminga is having 20 points on 20 shots, then fans aren't really going to let that go too much, when obviously, ideally, you'd have him being much more efficient winning games, or him just not taking as many shots, getting a different guy in there, getting someone on the trade market. Who knows? There's so many issues, I think, with the Warriors right now, but Jonathan Kuminga isn't really the biggest one. but he's still also a factor of he's the most talented young player on the team, and therefore do you have to utilize him in a trade for someone else? Maybe. I'm going to get into that. Not really too much else to talk about in terms of burning issues for the Warriors. It's mainly the offense and, of course, the positional stuff with the two-guard spot, the center position, and the backup point guard spot as well, which we'll get into a little bit more on the next episode. Thank you very much to you guys for watching. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252. That's POK252 on X/Twitter, and hope to see you in the next episode coming up in a few hours here, where I talk about all the latest trade speculation surrounding the Golden State Warriors.